everyone and welcome back to day 13 of Preptober. Today I'm here to talk to you about characters and not much more to say. Let's just go. Now, there are a couple different ways to figuring out what kind of characters you want in your story, and not just what kind of characters, but which characters. Either you might have a plot in mind, or a vague idea for a plot at least, and you can look at that idea and go, what characters do I need to put into this idea to make it as good as possible? And there are the classic, you need a main character and you need a villain, but sometimes the villain isn't even a person. But more than that, think about, okay, if I have a story with a bank robbery, okay, do I want the bank robber to be really persuasive, or do I want them to be really mean? Do I want them to charm their way into the vaults and steal the money that way? Or do I want them to put a gun to someone's head? You can also look at it from the other side. You might have come up with an idea for a character, but your character doesn't have a story that they belong into. A simple way of sort of remedying that would be to look at the character and the situation that they are in and go, what's the worst thing I can make happen to this person? And then build your plot that way. Now, coming up with characters is probably my favorite thing about the whole writing process, but I struggle with sitting down ahead of time before I've started writing and sort of making a character sheet of their physical attributes and of their personality and stuff like that, to sort of chart that out before I've gotten to know the character. This is why I like to refer to myself as a discovery writer, because I much prefer actually finding out all these things about the character when I sit down to write. There are some things you can decide on ahead of time that I tend to decide on ahead of time, and that's typically the physical attributes. Are they tall or short? Are they larger or smaller? Are they blonde, or do they have black hair or brown or green or whatever color you choose, and so on. The physical attributes I find a lot easier to plan out ahead of time and stick to than the personality traits. I find it really difficult to sit down, okay, well, this character, let's call him Steve because that's my go-to name. Steve is 6'2" and he has green hair and blue eyes, and he is snarky and he is loving and he is very loyal. Okay, but then I start writing about Steve and he takes me down a completely different path where he's actually quite manipulative and very dishonest and disloyal, and suddenly he doesn't match up with his character sheet anymore. And yes, I'm the author. I could probably whip Steve into shape and make him be what I said he was gonna be, but I also prefer actually finding out these things about him or anyone else as I go along. And if I'm even making a character sheet, fill those traits in as I learn more about him. I'm not saying that either way is better than the other, nor am I saying that, well, if you plan out exactly how Steve's gonna be, he'll be much more consistent than if you take it as it comes, because that's not necessarily true. And if you choose to leave the, personality traits empty until you've started writing the story, you can go back and add in that Steve is a goofball who is really manipulative. Great combo. And throughout the story, when you need to check in and see, how would Steve react in this situation, you have the personality traits. You might also be sitting on a character right now who you've written into a different story where they didn't belong. They had to be cut, or you scrapped that story entirely, but you still have that character that you really like. Why not transfer them into this new story? Sometimes that involves a bit more work than other times, because if you've written about Steve in a contemporary setting and now you're writing Lord of the Rings fanfiction and so you put him into Mordor, that can cause some problems. There might be things you have to tweak. You might have to change certain traits about him. For example, if he's a really avid phone scroller and meme distributor, he can't really do that in Mordor, probably. But taking a pre-existing character that you know and love and putting them into a different story can be a really good idea. And again, if you've scrapped the story they're in or just cut the character out, or if you still have that story but want the character to have a different adventure, I think that's a really good method to do it, and it's something that might be worth trying out, especially if you have that favorite character of yours that you haven't gotten to use in the way you've wanted to. Another thing to think about is how big your cast of characters is. Because the larger the size of the cast, especially if you have a lot of POV characters, see Game of Thrones, the more difficult it might be to keep track of them, both for you as a writer to make sure that all of them get equal screen time, probably page time, come to think of it, and also for the reader to keep track of, 60 characters that they're supposed to care about and remember what they're up to, and dedicate their time and interest into. So thinking of it strictly in that way, having a smaller cast tends to be easier because it's easier to make sure that you know what everyone is up to and to not forget anyone. Because I myself have been guilty of that, where I've written a scene where there are even as few as like 3-4 characters, but then for example the dialogue is only between 2 of the people and that lasts for 6 pages, and then you realize, oh, Steve was here too. Poor Steve. He keeps getting forgotten. And you realize that Steve is kind of not needed in this scene because he doesn't really add anything. And that's when you take Steve out of that story and you put him in Mordor. Pro tip. On the other hand, having a bigger cast of characters tends to get you more words because there are more people to talk about, and Nano, for some people, is all about the word counts. And I am once again going to refer back to the Magna Carta from a couple of videos ago, where you might have written that you really enjoy snarky characters. Maybe have a snarky character. Or you really like diversity. Make sure to have a diverse cast. And maybe you've also put in there if you'd like 50 characters in the cast or 5. Maybe you haven't been that specific, but maybe you put in something about a small or big cast. Anyway, that is all I have for you today. I'll be back with another video tomorrow, so I'll see you then. Bye!